Across the southeastern region of Nigeria, a name continues to resonate through time: Amadioha. Known within various communities for generations, Amadioha stands as a respected symbol in traditional thought, associated with principles of fairness, balance, and communal order. His presence has been acknowledged through stories, customs, and values passed down through oral tradition. In many traditional Igbo perspectives, natural events are seen as meaningful. Thunder and lightning, for instance, are not viewed merely as atmospheric phenomena, but are interpreted as reminders of nature's rhythm and accountability. In this view, Amadioha represents a presence tied to such expressions of the natural world, one that guides, corrects, and reinforces community values. Yet, deeper questions remain: who is Amadioha in the cultural memory of the people? How did his name come to be widely recognized across generations? And why have references to him diminished in mainstream awareness today? This video is not a fictionalized retelling. It is an exploration of cultural knowledge, an attempt to better understand a name that has stood quietly but firmly in the background of many ancestral narratives. Through careful research and respectful storytelling, we'll revisit the historical and communal significance of Amadioha, acknowledging the ways in which he has been remembered and represented. If you're someone who values cultural insight and seeks to understand how heritage has been shaped, remembered, or even challenged by time, then this journey into the story of Amadioha is one worth taking. In the cultural landscape of southeastern Nigeria, where oral tradition serves as the archive of generations, the story of Amadioha begins not with a written record, but with memory carried in proverbs, rituals, and the observations of elders. His name, depending on the region, is associated with the force of thunder and the clarity of light that cuts through clouds. To many, this association reflects not just nature's display, but the human desire to interpret power, justice, and presence through what the eyes can see and the heart can feel. Amadioha's identity is rooted in how traditional communities understood the world around them. Thunder was not random, it was rhythm. It was a reminder that certain actions have consequences. Lightning was not just bright, it was precise. In this worldview, Amadioha came to represent that precision, a force that clears confusion, reveals the hidden, and brings alignment when disorder threatens harmony. He is often mentioned in tandem with natural occurrences, but his presence was also tied to place. Various communities identified locations believed to reflect his essence spaces, where his symbolism was strongest, where local stories placed his activity, and where acts of communal judgment or reconciliation might take place. These places were not simply symbolic, they were markers of living tradition. The name Amadioha itself holds variations and meanings across different Igbo-speaking areas, reflecting the dynamic and decentralized nature of the culture. But whether called upon in moments of serious truth, telling or referenced in parables shared at dusk, the idea remained consistent. Amadioha stood for moral clarity. He was not a figure of fear, but of awareness, an embodiment of responsibility, invoked when the community needed reassurance that truth still held power. Understanding the origin of Amadioha is not just about looking backward, it's about recognizing how communities used narrative to reflect on leadership, fairness, and collective well-being. The early stories of Amadioha, though diverse, serve one unifying purpose: to remind people that every action echoes and every echo returns. In traditional Igbo societies, values such as truthfulness, fairness, and accountability were not left to chance. They were embedded in both communal practices and spiritual consciousness. Amadioha, as remembered across these communities, represented the embodiment of these values. He was not simply associated with thunder. He was regarded as a figure whose presence guided justice, corrected imbalance, and reminded individuals that actions carry weight. Amadioha's role was especially prominent in matters of truth. In some communities, people swore oaths in his name to affirm honesty, particularly in disputes or moments requiring public trust. These were not empty gestures. They were expressions of belief that the natural world, through forces like Amadioha, responded to dishonesty. This belief encouraged moral conduct, not out of fear alone, but from a shared understanding that life operates within a balanced system. There is also an element of caution in how Amadioha was spoken about. His presence demanded respect, not dramatization. Children were often taught not to speak lightly about certain forces, and Amadioha was among those whose name carried weight. The caution wasn't rooted in terror but in tradition, a recognition that certain names symbolized principles too sacred for casual use. His association with light through lightning also carried metaphorical meaning. Light reveals, light exposes. In this sense, Amadioha's presence wasn't only about retribution, it was about clarity. In times of confusion, people turned to this clarity, seeking insight, resolution, and peace. Amadioha's might, therefore, was measured not just in power but in purpose. Importantly, Amadioha's image and influence varied across regions. In some areas he was regarded more symbolically, in others more actively. But across these variations, a common understanding persisted that Amadioha stood for a kind of justice that exceeded human bias. His memory is a reminder that traditional societies had their own systems of checks and balances, once deeply intertwined with natural law and communal integrity. In various parts of Igbo land, expressions of reverence towards spiritual figures were reflected not only in words and teachings, but also in spaces, shrines, trees, clearings, or rivers that held symbolic meaning. In the case of Amadioha, certain locations across southeastern Nigeria became recognized as places where his presence was most honored. These sites were not grand monuments, but community-anchored settings where rituals, oaths, or reflections were carried out with focus and intention. Shrines dedicated to Amadioha often had features that connected with his natural symbolism. In some regions, they were situated near trees or open skies, echoing his association with thunder and lightning. These places served as points of mediation, where individuals or elders sought guidance in times of dispute, conflict, or uncertainty. They were also spaces for remembrance, where people acknowledged natural order and the unseen frameworks guiding human conduct. CPP connected with Amadioha varied across regions. The color white, often representing purity and truth in Igbo cosmology, was commonly associated with him. Some oral accounts mention a white ram as an animal connected to his image, again, not as a universal standard, but as a motif in storytelling and cultural memory. These symbols were part of a broader language through which traditional communities communicated respect, alignment, and spiritual sincerity. Community members who played roles in maintaining these spaces, often elders or spiritually designated individuals, did so not for spectacle, but as caretakers of tradition. Their responsibility was to preserve the principles represented by Amadioha: fairness, honesty, and social harmony. It's important to note that in many cases, these practices coexisted with daily life. They were not hidden or unusual, but a natural part of how communities engaged with the world around them. What's often misunderstood today is that these acts of reverence were never about fear or superstition. They were about continuity. People gave, not out of coercion, but as a sign of appreciation and balance. They remembered because forgetting meant losing a connection to identity. In honoring figures like Amadioha, they were also honoring the ethical foundations that held their communities together. Over time, communities naturally evolve, adapting to new ideas, technologies, and social systems. In many regions across southeastern Nigeria, these transitions brought changes not only to lifestyles and communication, but also to how certain cultural figures were referenced or remembered in public life. Amadioha, known for his symbolic connection to order and natural phenomena, was once a widely recognized presence in communal life. His name was spoken with familiarity, his values reflected in discussions around fairness and integrity, and his memory preserved through local traditions. As newer ways of living and organizing society emerged, the visibility of certain long-standing practices began to change. These changes were gradual, In some areas, cultural expressions that once occupied a central place in daily routines shifted to more private or less frequent observances. The reasons varied from evolving community priorities to broader changes in education, infrastructure, and organization of public life. As a result, some traditional names and customs, including those related to Amadioha, became less commonly referenced in formal settings. Yet the essence of these traditions remained. Many of the values associated with Amadioha, clarity, truth, responsibility, continued to be taught within families, preserved in local stories, or expressed through shared customs. Though public references may have lessened in some spaces, these ideas found continuity in quiet and meaningful ways. Today, understanding this historical transition helps provide context. It shows how cultural knowledge can shift form without being lost, adapting to changing times while maintaining its core. Amadioha's legacy, like that of many respected figures in traditional systems, lives on through the values and memories that remain part of communal identity. In recent years, there has been a growing interest in the cultural traditions and historical figures that once played a central role in everyday life across many Nigerian communities. Among them is Amadioha, not only as a name from the past, but as a symbol of values that remain deeply meaningful today. For many, remembering Amadioha is not about replicating old practices, but about reconnecting with a part of their identity. Across social discussions, academic work, and creative platforms, people are beginning to revisit the stories and symbols tied to their roots. In this process, Amadioha is often recognized as part of a broader reflection on ancestry, cultural memory, and traditional systems that once emphasized balance, justice, and ethical conduct. His name is appearing again, not only in historical texts but also in music, art, and local conversations that celebrate indigenous knowledge. This renewed interest does not always take the form of organized practice. In many cases, it's simply about awareness, a curiosity to understand what previous generations valued and how those ideas might still speak to today's challenges. The mention of Amadioha in such contexts becomes less about formality and more about reconnecting with heritage, philosophy, and shared memory. There are also communities where cultural continuity never fully faded. In these spaces, values associated with Amadioha, such as fairness, clarity, and the importance of aligning human action with natural rhythm, have quietly remained part of everyday decisions and community norms. These expressions may not always be public, but they are no less real. What makes this moment unique is the balance between learning and honoring. People are asking respectful questions, seeking understanding, and engaging with elders and scholars to fill in what time may have set aside. Amadioha, in this reflection, stands not just as a historical figure, but as a reminder of how culture endures, how values are passed forward, and how memory remains a quiet but powerful guide. In every culture, there are names that echo beyond their era, not because of how loudly they are spoken, but because of the meaning they carry. Amadioha is one of those names. Not a figure confined to history, nor one bound by ritual alone, but a symbol of principles that continue to hold relevance in many aspects of life: truth, balance, and accountability. Throughout this journey, we've seen how Amadioha was remembered across generations, not as a distant legend, but as a presence integrated into the moral compass of communities. We've traced how his image transitioned with time, shifting in form, but retaining its foundation in values that shaped interpersonal relationships and collective ethics. Today, the conversations around Amadioha are not about recreating the past exactly as it was. They are about understanding where we come from, why certain ideas endured, and how they shaped the way communities functioned. For many, this reflection brings clarity, not only about cultural identity, but about the enduring relevance of ancestral knowledge. Remembering Amadioha is also a reminder to listen closely to the wisdom carried in names and stories and in the natural rhythms that guided those before us. It is a quiet call to reflect, reconnect, and respect the frameworks that gave meaning to life long before modern transitions. If this journey has sparked thought or brought you closer to the richness of your heritage, consider exploring more about traditional knowledge systems and keep asking the questions that connect the present to the past. And if you found this video meaningful, be sure to subscribe and share, because understanding where we come from helps shape where we're going.